Today we're going to be looking at a early Whelen Edge strobe power supply and its switch box. This is set up for matrix C of the original V-strobe style Edge, one of the types I don't have. The Edge was made for a long time, 1984-ish, and in 2004 it was still going strong. The original style is the V-strobe style, one of the types I don't have. It was replaced by the J-tube style, which I do have several examples. Actually, by the time they patented the V-strobe, the J-tube had come. It was replaced by the turbo tube twist lock style here, which stuck around for a few years and then was phased out for the linear turbo tube style, which you see here as well, which kind of crossed over that one quite a bit. Then we went duplex, which overlapped, all of those overlapped the B-Link style. And then we went to the Ultra, which was a wider model. Then we brought back the 9M, which was the narrow model. And all of that kind of rolled into the LED versions of the bar that we see today using similar frames. So we're looking at a power supply right in the middle there for the V-tube style. Like I said, one of the types I don't actually have the bar. It's a smooth top bar. There were a few types when they first came out, and we're looking at one specific model, the power supply. There were three main matrices, which is how you run them. A was standard for 2 power supply model bars, meaning you could run 8 heads at a time. So your first button or switch would do all of your front, your second button would do all your rear, and your third would actually do all 8 strobes at once because you had 2 power supplies and you were in fact able to do that. That ran a specific subset of bars. Matrix B was less common. You could kind of make that assumption or use for either type of single or dual power supply bars. You're just switching the heads by what they are, not where they are. So this can work in a variety of setups. You're really just running your corner strobes versus your directional strobes, not really caring where they are or how many they are. It's kind of just a what it is type matrix. What we're looking at is matrix C, which came on the bars that had a single strobe power supply but had more than 4 strobes. So each power supply did 4 strobes, and if you had more strobes than you had power supplies to run them, matrix C was for you. That means 9106, and in this case we're simulating 9108. You could run all of your fronts, all of your rears, or just the corners to give you 360-degree coverage. They would call it 180s, which you're running 2 on each side, so it's 360. The way this matrix really functioned was like this. You could do the 4 corners, you could do the 4 front, and you could do the 4 rear. Now, if you were on a bar that didn't have 2 of the directionals, you just didn't get those 2 with that side of the bar. Also, you could theoretically set things up so it was progressive, and using both at once turned it into 360, which we'll see here in a second. I did happen to get my hands on a PCC 224 switch box and a relay board that was actually set up for matrix C, and I have a power supply and everything for matrix C except for the proper bar itself. So we'll take a look at the matrix here. Running front strobe gives you the 4 front strobes. So pretend that your corners in this case are your V-tubes and that your center is your directionals. Rear strobe, when combined with front strobe, actually puts you in corner mode or 360 mode. So it's almost progressive switching. You can see 360 doesn't change a thing when you have the first 2 activated. 360 is going to override both of the other ones. So it's almost like a slide switch. But when you put it in just rear, you get just rear. So the combination of front and rear makes 360, and 360 overrides front and rear. Really, it might as well have been a slide switch, but it's kind of interesting that they were doing the progressive switching with push buttons. It was one of the features of the matrix style setup is you could use your four head power supply with 8 outputs and just select which ones fired under which conditions. So the bar was actually patented in 1986, but they were out in the field a couple years before that. Actually, by the time they patented this design, they had already moved on to were starting to move on to the J-tube design. But as I said, this is the type of bar that I actually lack an example of. But what I do have is the components within. Like I said, the power supply, the switching, and I also have the correct bulbs. You see some dates here on the components I have. The switch, the supply, these are all technically after the patent. But here's an original bulb, 1986. Here's one from 1990. And here's one from 2002. They made these bulbs for a really, really long time and put them in other things. My Mini Max or the directionals, I have a couple different dates. An 04, I think is my latest. And then you'll see a brief appearance of this siren in the video too. But I had all the components for the bar. I just don't have the bar. That's the switching board, relay board. That goes with the switch box. There's the power supply with all 8 heads hooked up. So this is what the bar should look like, except it would be flat topped. You'd have your standoff brackets to mount these strobes. So what I've done is I've put the correct components into a much newer framed 9M frame, which ironically is the exact same dimensions. It's just got the fluted tops. So 360 strobe, or front strobe rather, is doing exactly what it did when we tested it out with the incorrect bulbs. Rear strobe's going to do the same deal. You're really just picking which 4 strobes you want to use at once, and you can select them individually like that. And like we touched on, if you combine front and rear, it just defaults to 360. Or you can shut them off and actually select 360, which would have overridden that anyway, and that gets you just your corners. It was your choice whether your corners alternated, meaning the 2 tubes at the end alternated with one another, or whether they alternated side to side. These alternate against each other. So your side is a split flash. That was completely up to the customer. I've seen them factory both ways. It's just the way I ran the wires in this particular testing rig. Give you a little warning here. If you ran in an ambulance or police car around this time, you're going to have some auditory stimulation here that might give you a little twinge. The old siren tone and the sound of the strobes firing together is a memory you probably will not be forgetting. You would have seen the switch box probably mounted under that siren. They had different ways of mounting them. Most people had them pretty close to one another, and these are correct time frames in the fact that the switch box and the siren overlap. But that very specific line of the strobes and that very specific tone of this generation of Whelen sirens are very specific, and when put together, certainly are memory-inducing, especially for someone that had the speaker right over their head. When I set up this demo, it really kind of was more to show the bar I don't have, but the components I do have, but moreover how the matrix system worked. in the early power supplies. It was not uncommon. It was a holdover from the 8000 series bar, that you may have more strobe bulbs than you have strobe power supply active outlets. So you would choose which ones you used at the same time. That was definitely a thing for Whelen, up until the mid or end of the J tube, the next era of strobe bars. They started really pushing you don't have more tubes than you have ability to use them. But running from the beginning of their strobe technology up until this bar, it was not uncommon to have a bar make you choose whether you used directional strobes, 360 strobes, or 180, whatever you want to call them, and how you sorted them out, whether you wanted to run 360 and rear, just 360, just front, and it just depended on how many outlets you had versus what strobes you had. And this is a very common matrix. The fact that you're going to have a total of 8 bulbs, one power supply, and you're going to have to choose 4 bulbs. So the way most, or the ones I've seen, users chose to set them up was you had a pursuit mode where you got all 4 fronts, and you had a parked mode where you got all 4 rear, and then you had a 360 mode. And without the switch box, the progressive switching could still be achieved through the relay board. They made other switches that would accomplish this. This is just a neat, tidy way to choose what you want to do. And the only thing that disappoints me really about that switch is that it doesn't, when you override something, the LED indicator doesn't turn off. But I get why, and it's still, an end user just needs to know that 360 trumps everything, and a combination of front and rear reverts to 360, which is the only way to achieve front and rear. The mounting of this power supply and these bulbs in the frame, like I said, are the components I do not have. That mounting system, which was part of that original 86 patent, actually changed significantly between this bar and the next generation bar, which was the J tubes, which they started, which they called combination directional 180 tubes. And they ran simultaneously for a while, where you could get either style at the end. And that would have been the period where you could still do a matrix where you chose to have more bulbs than you had outlets on your power supply. But pretty soon after that, getting into your early 90s, you had a J-tube bar that more directly mirrored the later bars. But the patent was sufficient for them to keep their I-beam style slide-in sort of design to themselves, all the way from this early 80s to the 2010-ish era, and then obviously they kept the freedom and the liberty in a very similar style with LEDs. So this design served Whelen very well, which is why I'm able to stuff the guts of a 1984 bar into the frame of a 2004 bar, which is actually pretty amazing for a product that you had the cross compatibility. That also is why it's pretty hard to get an original V-tube bar. I've had a couple of times when I've tried to purchase one only to find that it's been upgraded, if you will, and gutted, and it's got more modern components inside of it, which was a great deal for the customer that things were cross-compatible, but it's a real letdown to a collector when you see the right lenses, and the smooth top frame, or the power supply, and then come to find out that it's been gutted. Or you think you have one of these and the picture's bad and it's the underside of a bar and it's not a smooth top. So currently, I would love to get my hands on a smooth top version of the bar, and the internal mounting components. The original components were metal. The next generation were plastic. The plastic did hold up surprisingly well. However, replicating those metal standoffs is difficult. So I really would just like to get my hands on a whole bar, and I would then have either a second power supply to add to it, or I could replace the power supply if that's what was bad. Or if the power supply had been, quote, upgraded, I could switch it back out. When I decided to do this demo, I originally tested everything with par 36 strobes, just because they're my testing strobes. They're durable. I have them laying around. So I am going to include some footage here of my original matrix testing with this switch box, both at the final testing site and also when I was playing around with it in my workroom to make sure everything worked. It's almost, in some cases, easier to see how the matrix works with these blue par 36s, at least from my opinion, to see what's flashing at the same time. So I thought this was worth including, just so for the point of being able to see how the matrix worked, and that it did in fact do the front, rear, or ends. So there's some footage of this test inside the final testing location, and then there's some more footage of it inside my workroom. I think the point of the video has been made, showing off the capabilities of this supply, and also showing that it was still common to have more strobe heads than you had the ability to use at once, even in the Edge era. Something that was pretty common in the 8000 series era and the crossbar era that did carry over to the Edge era. Also, I think another interesting thing to point out would be that this relay matrix style switching was made for a decent amount of time, with some cross compatibility as well. So even though this is an original supply with its original control board, interfacing with a very similar, if not the original switch, the relay switching boards changed through the years, but they were very similar. And I have a few, the board color actually changes to green, but I have a few from probably almost 10 years after this that I could swap in if I needed to, and they still work. So all the footage from here on out is going to be the same sort of testing, but using the blue par 36s. So if you have enjoyed watching what comes on with what and at various speeds, there's quite a bit more footage here. Otherwise, I think kind of the point of the video has been made. And maybe you've been unnecessarily triggered by the sound of strobes mixed with very specific siren tones. But aside from that, if anybody has a original V-strobe flat smooth top bar, I want it, and I would be willing to trade or purchase it. So hit me up in the comments or get a hold of me on E-Light Bars or via the contact links. I would love to get a hold of one. I am still very interested in the fact that the matrix theory was carried over to this and from this, and I enjoyed messing around with the power supply and the switching, but really ultimately I'd like to have one of these bars. So thanks for watching. Enjoy the remaining footage if you so choose, and hit like if you wouldn't mind. and check out some similar projects posted on elightbars.org, and have a fine day.